What saves her is the Ice King. Not with a pep talk, not with wisdom. By comparing her to himself. By pointing out that they are essentially the same, both of them messed up and stuck and carrying something that has warped their lives. And Marceline looks at him, at the ghost of Simon Petrikov, at the man who was broken by forces he did not choose and could not stop, and realizes something crucial. She does not have to live his story. She is not doomed to become what her damage implies. Simon's damage became the Ice King, a person consumed by what happened to him, so thoroughly that the person he had been was simply replaced. Marceline's damage made her hard and thorny and guarded, but it has not consumed her. She is still there. And she has something Simon did not in the end. People who will stand with her. People who will be messed up with her, as Princess Bubblegum puts it. So she goes back out. She flies into the dark cloud of vampire essence, draws it all back into herself, reabsorbs 1,000 years of accumulated shadow, and she is bitten one more time and becomes, again, the vampire queen. But here is what is different. Before, she was a vampire who was also a messed up kid who had no idea how to deal with what she was carrying. Now she is a vampire who has looked directly at what she is carrying, named it, fought it, and made a choice about it. The external circumstances have not changed. The internal ones have changed entirely. The Vampire King, in a flashback during the miniseries, tells young Marceline something that functions as a kind of prophecy. He says that people make the same mistakes over and over. He has seen the patterns repeat. He believes this is simply the nature of things, that the wheel turns and the same weights always fall in the same places, and that fighting it is pointless. He seems, from his perspective, to be offering this as a kind of terrible wisdom. This is how things are, so you might as well stop struggling against it. Marceline eventually proves him wrong. Not by breaking the pattern entirely. She is a vampire again. After all, the external arc has returned to what it was before. But by demonstrating that patterns are not destiny. That the same thing can be lived through differently, depending on who you are when you are living through it. That the difference between being defined by your damage and being shaped by it without being ruled by it is not a matter of changing circumstances. It is a matter of changing the one who inhabits the circumstances. The Stakes miniseries is, in this reading, a story about the failure of a premise and the discovery of a truth. The premise was, if I remove the external marker of my trauma, I will be free. The truth was, freedom is not about the external marker. Freedom is about what you do inside the condition you cannot leave. This is not a comfortable truth. It does not feel as satisfying as the premise would have. It does not give you a clean ending where the messed up kid has become a whole and healed adult. What it gives you is something messier and realer. A messed up kid who has decided to be present for herself within her own mess, who has asked for help and received it, who has chosen to be where the love is rather than protecting herself from it, and who sings her mother's lullaby at the end because everything stays, and that includes the parts of her that are good. That is what growing up actually looks like. Not the shedding, the accepting. Section 8. Princess Bubblegum and the Philosophy of Loving. Across the distance you put between yourself and everyone. There is a detail in Adventure Time that is easy to miss if you are not looking for it. In the episode What Was Missing, the Door Lord steals an object of deep sentimental value from each of the main characters. From Finn, a piece of pink cloth given to him by Princess Bubblegum. From Jake, a photo of Lady Rainicorn. From Princess Bubblegum herself, a rock t-shirt. The rock t-shirt, it will turn out, belongs originally to Marceline. It is an old band shirt of the kind that accumulates memories, that becomes more than clothing through years of association. Princess Bubblegum keeps it because Marceline gave it to her. That it means more to her than almost anything she owns is stated plainly in the episode. The Swamp Witch Maya in a later episode says the shirt has more sentimental magic than anything she has ever encountered. The relationship between Marceline and Princess Bubblegum is perhaps the most delicately and persistently constructed relationship in the entire series. It begins in subtext so carefully maintained that the show's own network tried to pretend it was not there. It is confirmed in the series finale with a kiss in the middle of a battle. It is explored with full openness in Obsidian, years into their relationship, when they are living together and happy and still, somehow, learning how to talk to each other honestly. What makes this relationship philosophically interesting is not just that it exists, but the specific way it exists. The particular qualities it has that make it different from any other relationship either of these characters is capable of. Marceline and Bubblegum are, in almost every surface way, opposites. Marceline is chaotic, impulsive, emotionally raw when she is finally raw, operating on instinct and pride, and an almost physical aversion to being told what to do. Bubblegum is controlled, precise, intellectual to the point of coldness, someone who manages her subjects and her emotions with the same optimizing efficiency. Marceline floats through the world like she might disappear around any corner. Bubblegum sits in the center of her kingdom and organizes everything within reach. What they share, and what makes them make sense together, is this. They are both, in their utterly different ways, running from the same thing. Marceline is running from being left. Bubblegum is running from losing control. Both patterns are sophisticated, both are deeply functional in the short term, and both represent fundamentally the same fear in different clothes. The fear that if things get too close, too real, too outside the zone, you have spent your entire existence carefully managing, something important and irreplaceable will be lost. The history of their relationship, pieced together across seasons of subtext, and then explicitly detailed in Obsidian, is a story of two people who have had to learn, painstakingly and repeatedly, how to do something they are both terrible at. Be honest with each other. They were together before the show's main timeline. They broke up, in the flashback that Obsidian shows us, during a confrontation in the Glass Kingdom over a dragon. Bubblegum, in her controlling way, told Marceline to go home. Marceline, in her wounded and furious way, sang an angry punk song at the dragon to express what she could not say directly, and it worked. The dragon retreated. And then the damage of the fight sent them apart for what would turn out to be centuries. Two people, both of whom cared deeply about the other, unable to stay together because neither of them had yet developed the tools for the kind of vulnerability that relationship required. That is the story of the entire run of Adventure Time where these two are concerned. A slow, imperfect, sometimes infuriating movement toward the ability to be honest. The What Was Missing episode puts the dynamic on perfect display. The door will only open for a song that is genuinely true. Marceline sings I'm Just Your Problem, which contains her real feelings for Bubblegum under layers of sarcasm and accusation. It almost works, but not quite. Because the most honest version of what she is saying, not I'm angry at you, but I need to matter to you, I need you to see me, I need this to be real, is the version she cannot say yet. Princess Bubblegum, for her part, responds to this song by calling the lyrics distasteful. And in the reading the show invites, this response is not cruelty. It is the defensive response of someone who has just been seen more clearly than she was ready to be seen, reacting with the only tool available to her, which is to push the emotional content away. The shirt. Bubblegum's most treasured possession is a shirt that came from Marceline. A shirt that carries, according to the magic system of the show, more sentimental weight than almost anything else in existence. The shirt is saying, in the language of objects, I have been carrying something given to me by you for a long time. It matters to me more than I can say. It is in the place where I keep things I cannot afford to lose. This is what the relationship between Marceline and Bubblegum is, for most of the series. Something carried in the place where things too important to be set down are kept. Something that cannot be spoken, and therefore lives in the small, specific details. A shirt kept for centuries. A song hummed on the way to someone's castle. The instinct that keeps bringing you back to a person you are supposedly done with. The Autostraddle essay on the Stakes miniseries describes their relationship in terms of the loneliness and listlessness that both characters have grappled with as they have moved from the immediate aftermath of the Mushroom War into something approximating adulthood. Two near-immortal women, each carrying enormous histories, each brilliant and damaged and running her own defensive systems, finding in each other someone who is, in Marceline's words, willing to be messed up with her. This is the heart of what the relationship offers both of them. Not completion, not the filling of each other's absences. Something different. The presence of someone who understands the scale of what you are carrying, who is carrying something of similar scale themselves, and who has decided that your specific mess is the one they want to be present for. Princess Bubblegum, who built an entire kingdom as a way of imposing order on a chaotic world, finds in Marceline someone who cannot be organized or managed or controlled, and who does not want to be, who instead will push back, will argue, will refuse to be told what to feel, will insist on being met where she actually is, rather than where Bubblegum would prefer her to be. And this, for Bubblegum, is the most valuable kind of gift. Someone who makes her relationship with her own need for control a living, present problem rather than an abstraction she can manage in private. Marceline, who has spent a millennium expecting to be left when she is truly seen, finds in Bubblegum someone who has seen some of the most difficult parts of her, the dark cloud of her own repressed essence, the extent of her father's influence, the 1,000 years of avoided grief, and is still there. Still showing up. Still choosing to be in the equation. This is not a tidy love story. It is a long, complicated, frequently interrupted process of two very damaged people learning. One excruciatingly honest conversation at a time, how to let each other be real. It breaks and comes back together. It goes through centuries of silence. It exists in subtext and rumor and the language of objects and occasional punk rock breakup songs directed at dragons. And then, at the end of the original series, during a battle with a creature called Golb that is trying to unmake reality, it becomes a kiss. The timing of that kiss is very Adventure Time. In the middle of everything falling apart, when the stakes could not be higher and the situation is actively apocalyptic. Two women who have been moving toward this moment across the entire run of the show, finally closing the last inch of distance between them in the worst possible external circumstances, because they have finally arrived at the internal place where the external circumstances do not matter. Section 9. Obsidian and the Philosophy of Peace. Obsidian, the second adventure. Time, Distant Lands Special, is set some years after the series finale. Finn is shown as a fully grown adult man, with tattoos on his arm that appear to include an image of Jake, who, in the chronology of the universe, does not survive forever. Marceline and Bubblegum are living together in Marceline's cave house. They are making furniture together, baking pies, reading comics, existing in each other's daily life in the particular texture of domestic happiness, which is to say they are happy and also still learning things about each other, and the learning is still sometimes uncomfortable. The special calls them back to the Glass Kingdom, which is a kingdom made of glass people who were created by a bolt of magic lightning centuries ago. Marceline has been a saint to these people since before their civilization can remember. She saved them from a dragon once, with a punk rock song, and they have worshipped her ever since. The dragon, named Molto Larvo, has now been accidentally awakened by a glass boy named Glass Boy, who was trying to fix the crack in his own face. On the journey to the Glass Kingdom, Marceline and Bubblegum pass through the desert where Marceline and her mother once lived, and this is where the special begins to do the quiet, devastating work that makes it one of the finest things in the franchise. Bubblegum asks when Marceline lived out there. Marceline does not answer. She closes down, politely but completely, in the way she has always closed down when conversations move toward territory that costs too much to enter. And Bubblegum, who has spent centuries learning to read the specific way Marceline withdraws, notes that she likes Marceline's mysteriousness. She does not push. This is the version of Bubblegum who has grown. Not the controlling one who would find the silence frustrating, but the one who has learned that some doors can only be opened from the inside, and that the most loving thing you can do is let a person decide when they are ready. The Glass Kingdom flashbacks reveal the full story of their breakup. We see it from both sides. We see Bubblegum at her worst. Certain she is the most competent person in any room, defaulting to control when she is scared, failing to read Marceline's emotional state because she is too focused on solving the practical problem. We see Marceline at her worst, interpreting Bubblegum's dismissal as a final rejection, responding with the song that is both her most honest expression of hurt and her most effective weapon, not caring in that moment whether it solves the dragon problem or burns everything to the ground. And then we see the aftermath. The song does drive Larvo back. It works. And then Marceline turns to look at Bubblegum, and there is something in that look. The full weight of 100 years of caring about someone, the fury and the love all compressed together. And Bubblegum runs away crying. Because even for Bubblegum, even with all her armor of intellect and control, there is a moment where the reality of what she just lost breaks through. They did not speak again for centuries. In the present story, the dragon is awake again, and Marceline discovers that the angry punk rock song that worked before will not work now. The rage has changed shape. She has changed. She cannot summon the pure, fierce fury of that young woman singing to a dragon in the Glass Kingdom as an act of devastated love. Because she is not that person anymore. She has done the work. She has made the peace. What she has instead, what she finds at the bottom of the old wound in the ruins of the shelter where her mother left her, hearing for the first time the recording Elise made, is something softer and more terrible. Grief. The clean, specific grief that she has never actually allowed herself to feel. Not in 1,000 years, because feeling it would mean believing it was real. Admitting that her mother was gone, and that her mother had loved her, and that both things were true at the same time. The song she sings to stop the dragon the second time is not about rage. It is a love song. It is about Bubblegum, about the specific dailiness of loving a person, the small repeated acts of attention and patience and choosing to stay, the way love accumulates in the texture of a shared life rather than in the dramatic gesture. The dragon responds to this song because the dragon, it turns out, was sealed by love the first time as well, by the song that Marceline sang to Bubblegum when she thought she was singing in anger. The anger was the surface. The love was what carried it. It was always the love. The cracks in Glass Boy's face, which have been the subplot of the special and the cause of his ostracism from his community, are reframed at the end. They are not flaws. They are not reasons to be ashamed. They are the marks of a life that has bent under weight and not broken. They are evidence of surviving. And see-through Princess, Glass Boy's only friend, stands up for him, and the community begins to reckon with what it has been doing in condemning people for the evidence of their resilience. This is Marceline's philosophy, made literal in the Glass Kingdom's story. Every crack in Marceline's foundation, every loss, every abandonment, every century of avoided grief, every relationship broken by walls she built, is not a sign of damage that should be hidden. It is the shape of 1,000 years of surviving, of choosing not to stop, even when stopping would have been easier. The cracks are what she is, and they are worth something. The recording her mother left behind does not undo the grief. Nothing could do that. What it does is change the meaning of the grief. She was not left because she was monstrous. She was not sent away because she was too much. She was sent forward, imperfectly, by a dying woman who loved her more than she could express and was trying to give her a future when no other gift was available. Marceline stands in the ruins of that shelter and cries. And it is different from the crying of the little girl who stood in the ruins of the old world 1,000 years ago, not knowing why her mother was gone. This crying knows why. This crying has a name for what was lost, and a name for what was loved, and a name for the woman who sang "Everything Stays" because she meant it. This is the grief that comes after understanding, and it is, somehow, less unbearable than the grief that comes from confusion. Obsidian ends with Marceline and Bubblegum on a rooftop, looking out over the Glass Kingdom. They are not dramatically reunited. They are not newly in love. They are just there, together, in the ongoing project of building something real out of all the complicated material they both contain. Bubblegum is still a control-adjacent obsessive who sometimes forgets that the people around her have their own interior lives. Marceline is still someone who closes certain doors and only opens them when she is ready. Neither of them has been fixed. Both of them are still fully themselves. And they are together, still working at it, still choosing it, still there. Section 10. What Marceline teaches us. Let me come back to that image. The little girl in the ruins holding a teddy bear that a kind stranger found in a toy store. Crying. She has been through things that no child should have to navigate. Her world ended before she was old enough to understand what worlds are. Her mother loved her and could not stay. Her father loved her in the only way he could, which was not enough. Her chosen father, the one who pushed her on chairs and told terrible jokes and sacrificed his mind to keep her safe, disappeared by degrees until there was nothing left of him but a shell that wore his face and felt a pull toward her it could not explain. She became a vampire. Not because she sought power, but because she was trying to protect the people she was losing. And the cost of that protection was her humanity. She built a life in the post-apocalyptic landscape of ooh, filling houses and leaving them, filling relationships and leaving them, filling songs with the feelings she could not otherwise express, and letting them carry the weight she could not put anywhere else. She did all of this for 1,000 years, and she was, for most of that time, fundamentally alone. Not friendless. She found Finn and Jake. She moved slowly toward Bubblegum. She made music, which is never entirely solitary because music is addressed to someone, even when that someone is the open air. But alone in the foundational sense, carrying the architecture of a self built on the assumption that love is temporary, that showing your worst parts is always a mistake, that the safest position is the one where you need least and offer just enough to keep people interested without letting them close enough to leave a mark when they go. What Marceline teaches, across the sprawling 1,000-year-long narrative of her existence, is not a simple lesson. It does not reduce to a tidy instruction. It is, instead, a demonstration. A long and imperfect and entirely honest demonstration of what it looks like to carry profound damage and keep choosing to be alive in spite of it. She teaches that you can be messed up and still be a good person. That the darkness inside you is not a verdict on your character. It is a history, an inheritance, a collection of things that happened to you that you are still finding places to put. That the armor you built to survive real threats does not automatically become unnecessary just because you are now safe, but that the armor, over time, begins to cost more than it protects, and that the bravest thing you can do, after a long time of needing the armor, is to try to put it down. She teaches that music is not an escape from feeling, but a way into it. That there are things too large to be said in prose, too complicated for ordinary conversation, and that these things need a different container. They need rhythm and melody and the distance that a song provides. That gap between you and the most devastating part of what you are trying to say that allows you to say it without being destroyed by it. She teaches that when words are inadequate, art is not a lesser substitute. Art is the real thing. She teaches that love, the deep and lasting kind, is not the absence of conflict. It is the persistent choice to come back, to try again, to learn the person you are with as they continue to change, to offer your own imperfect interior as something worth knowing, even on the days when you are not sure it is. She and Princess Bubblegum broke up over a dragon. They spent centuries not speaking, and they found their way back to each other, not because they had become different people, but because they had become more honestly the people they already were. She teaches that grief does not have a shelf life, that a person can carry sorrow for 1,000 years and still, when the real shape of it is finally revealed, cry like they just lost something. That there is no statute of limitations on the wounds that were made when you were young and the world was less equipped to hold you. That late grief is still grief. That late understanding is still understanding. That the discovery that you were loved, after 1,000 years of not knowing it, is still a discovery worth weeping over. She teaches that your identity is not your damage, and your damage is not your identity, and that the difference between those two things is something you have to choose. repeatedly, and imperfectly, for the entire length of your existence. That the question of who you are cannot be answered by your history, only complicated by it. That Marceline is not the girl whose mother left, or the girl whose chosen father disappeared, or the girl whose biological father ate her fries without looking at her face. She is those things, and she is also the woman who picks up her axe bass in the middle of the night and writes songs about them, who chooses, against every instinct she developed as a way to survive, to let people in, who hangs out with Finn and Jake and teaches Jake how to summon demons and races Bubblegum on motorcycles and sings at open mics in the Candy Kingdom, and builds furniture in a cave house, and eventually, quietly, lets herself be loved. And she teaches, perhaps most importantly, that surviving is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning. The work that comes after surviving, the long, uncomfortable, sometimes humiliating work of actually living, that is what the story is for. That is what the 1,000 years are for. Not accumulation of power or experience or loss, but the slow and stumbling arrival at the place where you can put the weight down for a moment, where you can trust someone else to help you carry it, where you can hear your mother's voice on a recording a millennium after her death and let yourself feel it, all of it, without building another wall around it. That is not a small thing. For Marceline Abadir, or for anyone. Closing. Somewhere in the land of Oo, a vampire queen is floating in her cave, playing bass in the dark. The sound fills the space around her, rich and strange, the way music sounds when it is being made by someone who means every note. Outside, the moon is doing its thing, turning the landscape of this post-apocalyptic world into something quietly beautiful. The ruined cities of the old world are somewhere underneath everything, the bones of what came before, and on top of them the new world has grown up wild and colorful and strange. She has been here for 1,000 years. She will probably be here for 1,000 more. But she is not the same person who stood in the rubble and cried. Not because the crying was wrong, or the damage was not real, or the losses did not leave marks, but because somewhere between then and now, she made the decision, not once but over and over, the same decision required again every time the armor feels easier and the connection feels dangerous, to stay anyway, to be present in her own life, to let the songs carry what she cannot say, to let the people she loves actually love her back. The bear Simon gave her is still around, or was, for a long time. The song her mother taught her stays in her voice. The message from the shelter stays in whatever part of her keeps the most important things. Everything stays, but it still changes. And she is changing too. Slowly, imperfectly. In little ways, but still. She is the vampire queen of Oo, and she has been a messed up kid for 1,000 years, and she is finally, at last, learning what it means to grow up. And if that is not a philosophy worth spending 1,000 years on, I do not know what is. If this video gave you something to think about, please leave a comment below and tell me your thoughts on Marceline. Tell me which part of her story hits hardest for you. And if you have not already, hit that subscribe button and the bell so you do not miss what we explore next. This channel is built for the quiet hours, for the nights when you want something to let your mind settle into, and I will keep making things that I hope are worth your time. Sleep well, and maybe dream about a little girl in the ruins, learning, 1 century at a time, that she was never as alone as she believed. Dozing off time. Adventure time. Carried into the dark. Expanded section. The axe base and the art of making things. Marceline's instrument is worth talking about as a philosophical object in its own right. She made her bass guitar from her family's heirloom battle axe. Think about what that means. She took a weapon, an object designed for violence, for ending things, for the specific kind of force that destroys, and she turned it into an instrument. Something designed for creation, for expression, for the specific kind of force that builds and connects and opens. This transformation is not incidental. It is a perfect emblem of the work Marceline does with her own nature throughout the series. She inherited things that could have made her purely destructive. The demonic bloodline from her father, with its soul-sucking power and its affinity for darkness. The vampirism she absorbed by hunting and defeating the ancient vampires of Oo. The profound childhood losses that, in less resilient people, produce either profound cruelty or complete withdrawal. All of these were potential axes. And she made a bass guitar. She made something you play. Something you carry with you, not to defend, but to express. Something that requires skill and attention and the willingness to be heard. The axe bass is, in miniature, the whole argument of her character. That what you inherit does not determine what you do with it. That the shape of the original tool does not define the shape of what you make from it. That transformation is not just possible but, for Marceline, necessary. That the very act of transformation is how she maintains herself as someone worth being. She is not the only musician in Oo, but she is the musician whose music matters most in the narrative, because for Marceline, music is not recreational. It is the primary technology by which she manages to inhabit herself. When she is playing, she is processing. When she is processing, she is present. When she is present, she is capable of the honesty and the connection that her history makes difficult. The bass is the tool through which Marceline's interior life becomes accessible, to herself and to the people who care enough to listen. There is something here about what art does in the context of trauma that the show understands with unusual sophistication. The standard therapeutic language about art is that it provides expression, an outlet, a way to get things out. This is true, but insufficient. What Marceline's music actually does is more specific. It creates a container that is large enough for the thing she is trying to hold. Ordinary conversation cannot hold what Marceline carries. The scale and the age of it overwhelm the ordinary structures of interpersonal exchange. But music has no scale limit. Music can hold the grief of 1,000 years without the frame collapsing, because music operates outside the logic of everyday proportion. A 3-minute song can contain a lifetime. A single chord change can carry the weight of everything that could not be said. This is why the most important moments in Marceline's story are almost always scored. Not just accompanied by music, but enacted through music. The confrontation with her father's indifference happens through a song. The realization that she and Bubblegum still matter to each other happens through a song. The confrontation with Simon's lost self happens through a song. The acceptance of who she is at the end of Stakes happens through a song. The saving of the Glass Kingdom in Obsidian happens through a song, and more specifically through the discovery that the song that saves the day is not the angry one, but the loving one. That the love was always what was carrying the music, even when the music sounded like fury. The axe bass is the thesis of Marceline's life, expressed in the language of objects. You can make something beautiful out of the thing that was meant to wound. Expanded section. The Mushroom War's Long Shadow. It is worth spending more time with the Mushroom War itself, not as backstory, but as the specific philosophical context that makes everything about Marceline possible to understand. The Mushroom War, named presumably for the mushroom clouds of nuclear detonation, destroyed human civilization approximately 1,000 years before the main events of Adventure Time. What followed was not just political and social collapse, but a fundamental transformation of the physical world. Radiation, magical residue, the strange energies released by whatever weapons were used, all of these combined to produce the land of Oo, where candy kingdoms and mathematical wizards and vampires and shape-shifting dogs are the normal texture of daily life. The world we recognize is still there, if you dig. Ruined cities. Old infrastructure. The occasional piece of technology or cultural artifact that survived. But what is on the surface, what breathes and thinks and builds kingdoms, is something new. Marceline is the bridge between these two worlds. She is old enough to remember the world before. She has lived through the entire arc of civilization's rebuilding, from the immediate post-apocalyptic desolation to the colorful, magical, genuinely functional world of Oo. She has watched things grow from ruins. She has watched new cultures form where old ones were destroyed. She has watched human concerns, which once structured everything, become a kind of mythology. Finn the human is an anomaly, a curiosity, evidence of something that used to exist and now almost doesn't. What does this do to a person, philosophically speaking? What does it do to carry that length of time, that span of history, in a single consciousness? One of the things it does is make pattern recognition inevitable. The Vampire King, in Stakes, says that he has seen the same mistakes repeat so many times that he has simply stopped caring. The wheel turns. The same weights fall in the same places. History, from a perspective long enough, starts to look like a loop. And there is a particular kind of nihilism that becomes available at that scale. The nihilism of someone who has seen too much to be surprised by anything, and whose familiarity with the patterns of human behavior has cured them of the ability to be moved by any individual instance of those patterns. Marceline is at risk of this. She shows signs of it. In her darker periods, she is clearly operating from a place of having been here before, having felt this before, knowing how this ends, and feeling the accumulated exhaustion of having lived through enough of these cycles to be tired of them. The 1,000-year weariness is in her voice sometimes, in the way she moves, in the spaces between her jokes. But the show refuses to let her fully arrive at the Vampire King's nihilism, and the reason it refuses is instructive. It keeps giving her new things to care about. Not big new things, not new cosmic revelations. Small things. Finn's relentless optimism, which Marceline finds both exhausting and strangely refreshing. Jake's uncomplicated affection, which does not come with conditions or history, or the complicated calculus that Marceline applies to every relationship. Princess Bubblegum's particular kind of challenge? Someone who is as complicated as Marceline in entirely different ways, and who therefore cannot be sorted into any of the categories Marceline has developed for managing people. What the show argues, through Marceline's continued capacity for feeling and connection despite 1,000 years of reason to stop feeling and connecting, is that the cure for historical nihilism is not more history, but more presence. Not the evidence that things can change at the scale of civilizations, but the experience of mattering to specific people in specific moments. The 1,000 years do not become meaningless by the existence of one genuine relationship, but one genuine relationship can make the 1,000 years worth having lived. Marceline survives the Mushroom War and everything that comes after it, not because she is immune to what it costs, but because, in spite of everything, she keeps finding things that cost her enough to prove she is still here, still capable of caring, still a person, rather than simply a very old and very powerful entity that used to be one. Expanded section. The Philosophy of the Found Family. One of the things that happens to Marceline over the course of Adventure Time, gradually and with the particular Adventure Time commitment to never making anything explicit until it is undeniable, is that she acquires a family. Not a family of origin. Not her father's Nightosphere dynasty or her mother's human bloodline. A chosen family, assembled over decades from the people who kept showing up and proving themselves willing to occupy the specific and unusual territory that being close to Marceline requires. Finn and Jake are in this family, though it takes a while for everyone to admit it. They start as adversaries, or at least as targets for Marceline's pranks. They become friends in the organic, unplanned way that friendship actually happens. Through repeated contact, through the slow accumulation of shared experiences, through Finn's particular brand of earnest and relentless goodwill that makes it difficult even for Marceline to maintain the necessary distance. What Finn gives Marceline specifically is the experience of being taken seriously by someone who is not scared of her. Not the theatrical, not scared that is itself a form of performance, but genuinely, practically not scared. The way a fundamentally good-natured person is not scared of things that are merely powerful, because they have not yet learned to distinguish between power and threat. Finn treats Marceline the way he would treat anyone, with curiosity, with respect, with the specific kind of interest in her well-being that comes from genuinely caring rather than from being managed or afraid. For someone who has spent centuries reading in people's responses to her the evidence of her own monstrousness, this is remarkable. It is, in its small and undramatic way, revolutionary. Princess Bubblegum's role in the found family is both more complicated and more central. She is, in every way that matters, Marceline's primary relationship, the one that costs the most, requires the most, tests the most, and in the end, offers the most. They are not a family the way Finn and Jake and Marceline are a family, in the loose, friendly way of shared adventures and mutual fondness. They are whatever the word is, for two people who have woven themselves so deeply into each other's histories that the question of identity becomes inseparable from the question of relationship. What Bubblegum offers that no one else can is full witness. She is old enough, and has been close enough to Marceline for long enough, to have seen most of the range of what Marceline is. The darkness and the tenderness, the fury and the vulnerability, the performance and the thing under the performance. And she is still here, still choosing to be here. Not despite what she has seen, but in full knowledge of it. This is the thing that changes everything, philosophically, for a person whose foundational wound is around being left when seen. When someone who has seen you clearly and comprehensively decides to stay, not for the first time, but across decades, across centuries, across a breakup and a period of not speaking and a reconnection and a new beginning. It offers evidence against the founding belief in a way that nothing else can. Marceline's architecture of self-protection was built on the assumption that full visibility leads to abandonment. Bubblegum has spent the better part of 1,000 years providing a counterexample. The found family, in Adventure Time, is not presented as a solution to the character's fundamental damages. Finn's family does not cure his father wound. Jake's does not cure whatever Jake is not examining. And Marceline's does not cure hers. What the found family provides instead is something more modest and more real, a context in which healing is possible, a set of relationships sturdy enough to be practiced in, a place where the risk of being fully seen is accompanied by enough evidence of safety that it starts to feel, slowly, like a risk worth taking. This is the philosophy of the found family as Adventure Time understands it. Not rescue, but context. Not the removal of damage, but the creation of a world in which you can bring the damage out of the dark and examine it with the help of people who have decided you are worth the examination. Marceline has been building this context, unintentionally, across the entire series. Every relationship she has maintained despite herself, every person she has let pass the armor, every moment of genuine contact with another consciousness, has been brick by brick constructing the context in which the work of her final arc becomes possible. You cannot do what she does in Stakes and Obsidian without Finn's uncomplicated affection and Jake's easy warmth and Bubblegum's difficult and necessary love already in place. The ground has to be prepared before the thing can grow in it. Marceline, who has been abandoned by so many people, who has built her entire philosophy of self around the certainty of abandonment, ends up building something extraordinary. A family of people who choose her, not who are obligated to her by blood or circumstance, who choose her, who come back, who stay. That is the philosophical heart of what Adventure Time offers through Marceline's story. Not that trauma can be erased or that grief can be resolved or that 1,000 years of damage can be undone by the right combination of good relationships, but that the choice to keep building, to keep opening, to keep being present in your own life despite all the evidence your history provides for why that is a bad idea, this choice, made repeatedly and imperfectly over centuries, can produce something that looks, by the end, very much like peace. Expanded section. Dark is not evil and the reclamation of the self. There is a phrase that gets used in discussions of Marceline that is worth dwelling on. Dark is not evil. It is, in the vocabulary of Adventure Time criticism, a description of Marceline's function in the show's moral universe. She is literally dark. Black hair, gray-blue skin, a wardrobe that runs to the gothic end of the spectrum, powers that involve consuming souls and commanding the undead. She is the Vampire Queen, which is about as ominous a title as titles get. And she is not evil. This sounds simple, but it is doing something quite profound, both within the show and as a piece of cultural argument. Because the conflation of darkness with evil is one of the oldest and most pervasive assumptions in storytelling, and arguably in human psychology more broadly. Things that look dangerous are dangerous. Things that resemble death are lethal. Things that operate outside the light are hiding something. These are not irrational assumptions. They are heuristics that have survival value. But they are also, as Adventure Time understands, deeply reductive when applied to people. Marceline is dark because her history is dark. She survived the end of the world. She was raised in the apocalyptic aftermath of nuclear war. She lost her mother to radiation poisoning. She watched her chosen father disappear by degrees into madness. She absorbed the souls of ancient vampires, taking their powers and their darkness into herself, carrying the worst of what they were so that others would not have to be threatened by it. She is dark because she has been through things that genuinely were. But she is not evil. And the distinction between being dark and being evil is, in the show's moral framework, everything. Evil in Adventure Time is characterized by the specific quality of wanting to unmake others, wanting to consume, to control, to erase the specific individuality of other conscious beings. The Lich wants extinction. Hunson Abadir, at his worst, wants souls because having them is power over whoever they belong to. The ancient vampires want to feed, to dominate, to exist at others' expense. Evil, in this universe, is fundamentally about treating other beings as resources rather than as subjects. Marceline does not do this. She feeds on the color red rather than blood, specifically because blood is a living thing that belongs to someone, and she does not want to take living things that belong to someone. She is powerful enough to demand anything from the people around her, and she does not demand what she could. She pulls pranks on Finn and Jake, but returns their home when she realizes how much it actually matters to them. She protects people who cannot protect themselves, has done so for centuries, and does not particularly advertise this because the coolness is part of the armor, and the armor has its own maintenance requirements. The darkness, in Marceline's case, is not a symptom of evil. It is a symptom of history. It is the patina that accumulates on something that has been through 1,000 years of the specific experiences she has been through. It is the shape that trauma takes when it does not calcify into cruelty, when it stays soft and feeling and present, when it maintains its capacity to be moved and hurt, and eventually, slowly, healed. This is one of the most generous things Adventure Time does for its audience. It offers, through Marceline, the image of someone who has been through genuinely terrible things and who is genuinely dark as a result, and it insists that this darkness is not a verdict. It is not the final word on who she is. It is not something to be corrected or cured or overcome. It is part of her, and the part of her it is can coexist with tremendous tenderness, tremendous loyalty, tremendous creativity, tremendous love. The philosophy in this is one that real people need to hear, that the worst things that have happened to you do not determine your worth or your character. That being marked by darkness does not make you evil, does not disqualify you from love or connection or the ordinary ongoing business of being a person who matters to other people. That the darkness can be part of the texture of who you are without being the definition. Marceline is dark. Marceline is not evil. And the distance between those two things is where she lives. Expanded section. The 1,000-year architecture of solitude. Let us talk, specifically and carefully, about what 1,000 years of solitude actually means. Not poetically, practically. Marceline's experience of time is structurally different from any human experience of it. For a human being, memories fade. The edges of old pain soften with distance. The person you were at 7 becomes a story you tell, rather than a state you still inhabit. The distance between past and present is not just chronological, but ontological. Who you are now has genuinely changed from who you were, and the physiological changes of aging serve as continuous evidence of that change. You can feel the distance. Your body is proof of it. Marceline has no such evidence. She exists at the same apparent age she was when the Vampire King bit her, somewhere in late adolescence, 17 or 18 in the biology of it. Her body does not chart time. She does not have the physical evidence of change that human beings use as a proxy for psychological distance from the past. In the most literal sense, she looks the same today as she did 1,000 years ago. And the psychological consequence of this is precisely what the Stakes miniseries diagnoses. She is still, in many ways, the messed-up teenager who became a vampire, psychologically frozen at the moment of transformation. This is the aspect of immortality that fantasy usually glosses over. The wish fulfillment version of living forever imagines accumulation, wisdom, experience, perspective, the gradual refinement of a self that has simply had more time than others to develop. The realistic version, which Adventure Time offers through Marceline, is that living forever does not automatically produce growth. It can just as easily produce stagnation. It depends entirely on whether the immortal being is doing the work of growth or whether the absence of urgency, the absence of the deadline that mortality provides, makes it possible to defer that work indefinitely. Marceline defers it for a very long time. And the form this deferral takes is the form most people recognize: keeping busy, keeping moving, filling the time with activity so that the underlying absence, the emptiness she names in the opening of Stakes, does not have room to become fully visible. She finds new houses. She builds new lives in each one. She makes music. She has adventures. She pulls pranks. She accumulates things: guitars, memories, a vast and eclectic house full of objects that mean something to her. She is never exactly idle. But underneath all of it, the wound from the very beginning has not been touched. The foundational beliefs assembled in the rubble of the Mushroom War, about being left, about the cost of showing yourself, about the particular danger of needing anyone, have simply been sitting there, below the 1,000 years of activity, in exactly the same state they were in when they were first formed. One of the things this produces, across the series, is the quality of ancient pain carried in a young body. Marceline looks 17. She sometimes acts 17. Impulsive, reactive, performing emotions, rather than sitting with them. But then something will happen that catches her off guard, that reaches the thing underneath the performance, and suddenly she is immensely old, immensely tired, looking out at the world from the perspective of someone who has had 1,000 years to see the patterns repeat and has found no peace in the repetition. The juxtaposition of those two registers, the teenager and the ancient, is one of the things that makes her such a compelling presence. She contains multitudes because she contains centuries. The question Stakes asks, and that Obsidian continues to explore, is whether growth can still happen at the far end of that kind of prolonged deferral. Whether it is too late, after 1,000 years, to start the work that should have begun at the beginning. And the answer the show gives is, it is not too late. It is never too late. The work is harder at 1,000 years than it would have been at 20, harder because the architecture of avoidance has had more time to become structural, more time to become load-bearing, more time to become the thing the whole self is organized around. But harder is not impossible. And the work, whenever it begins, is worth beginning. This is one of the most genuinely hopeful things the show says, not through a speech or a lesson, but through the simple act of showing Marceline doing the work and surviving it. Through showing that the pieces of the self that have been held in the frozen state of an old wound do not need to be discarded to be healed. They need to be met, acknowledged, given the grief they were never allowed to have, and then carried differently, not put down, not resolved, not fixed, but held with intention rather than held at bay. Expanded section. What comes after the ending? Adventure. Time ends, technically, in the series finale, Come Along With Me. But it does not really end. The Distant Lands specials are proof of this. The characters continue, the stories continue, the philosophical questions the show has been asking across 10 seasons continue to be asked and answered in new contexts. For Marceline specifically, what comes after the ending is the question of what it looks like to live in the peace you have earned. Because Obsidian is set in a version of Marceline's life where the major crises are largely behind her. She is with Bubblegum. They are building furniture, baking pies, reading comics together in the quiet of the cave house. Simon has his mind back, Finn is grown, and seems to be doing well. The immediate catastrophic threats that structured the earlier part of her life have largely resolved. This should be the easy part. This should be the reward. And in many ways it is. The domestic happiness shown in Obsidian's opening is genuine and obvious and lovely to see. But the show is perceptive enough to understand that arriving at peace does not mean having mastered it. That the habits of 1,000 years of self-protection do not simply dissolve in the warmth of finally being loved. That Marceline, even in this beautiful domestic life with a person who has seen her clearly and chosen her anyway, is still someone who closes down when the conversation moves toward the territory that costs too much to enter. Who does not tell Bubblegum where she used to live, driving past the ruins of her childhood. Who has not, even now, fully processed the wound at the bottom. What Obsidian shows is that healing is not a destination. It is a practice. It is the ongoing and never quite completed work of being present with what you carry, of choosing honesty over protection, even when protection feels so much safer, of allowing the people who love you to know you well enough to help you bear what you cannot put down. The Glass Kingdom storyline is, among other things, a meditation on this. The Glass people have a crack in their culture, a literal crack in Glass Boy, and the community's response to him mirrors the responses many communities have to members who bear visible evidence of damage. Cover it up. Don't talk about it. Pretend the crack isn't there. And if you can't pretend, exclude the person who makes it undeniable. The crack represents something the community has decided is shameful. Evidence of something that went wrong, something that should have been stronger, something that reflects badly on whoever is bearing it. Marceline's relationship to the Glass Kingdom story is direct and personal. She knows something about carrying damage that you have been told to hide. She knows something about the specific loneliness of being the kind of person whose interior evidence does not conform to the standard of what is acceptable to show. And the resolution she offers, through music, through the song that is really about love rather than anger, through the message that the crack does not define what Glass Boy is worth, is the resolution she is still finding her way to in her own life. The crack is not the flaw. The crack is the record. It says, I have been through something. I have bent under it, and I did not break. I am still here, shaped by what happened to me but not destroyed by it. And the shaping is part of what I am, and the shaping is worth something. This is what Marceline has to offer the land of Ooh, after 1,000 years of living in it. Not the vampire powers, though those have their utility. Not the immortality or the music or the cool punk rock persona that intimidates anyone who does not know her well enough to see past it. What she has to offer is the specific wisdom that comes from having been through the worst things the world offers. The loss of everyone, the loss of the world itself, the loss of versions of yourself you needed to keep, and having survived it without becoming the kind of person who uses their damage as license to damage others. She is still here. She is still choosing to be here. She is still choosing the people she loves, still choosing the base over the axe, still turning weapons into instruments, still sending the accumulated weight of 1,000 years out through her fingers into sound, still insisting, by the simple act of making music, that there is something here worth expressing, that she is someone worth knowing. The ending, for Marceline, is not a resolution. It is a direction. It is the ongoing practice of being, more fully and more honestly, herself. And after 1,000 years of the alternative, that practice, imperfect, ongoing, never quite complete, is the most radical and most hopeful thing available. One last thing before you sleep. There is a version of the Marceline story that ends in tragedy, the version where the accumulated weight of 1,000 years of loss and deferred grief and foundational wounds simply becomes too much, where the armor becomes permanent, where the performance hardens into the whole of the self and the thing underneath the performance atrophies from disuse, where Marceline, the vampire queen, continues floating through the centuries as an increasingly powerful and increasingly empty entity, accumulating more distance from everything that ever made her feel something real. That version exists, in the narrative logic of the show. It is where the vampire king went. It is where the other ancient vampires went, not evil in the sense of choosing cruelty, but eroded, hollowed by the weight of their own immortality, reduced to patterns and hungers, with nothing interior driving them anymore. It is one of the possible trajectories for a being who has lived long enough and lost enough and protected themselves well enough. Adventure Time refuses that trajectory for Marceline, not because it is unrealistic, it is very realistic, but because the show is making an argument. It is saying, even given all of this, even given 1,000 years and the Mushroom War and everyone leaving and the foundational wound and the armor so elaborately constructed it became an architecture, the other trajectory is also available. The one that goes toward rather than away. The one that stays soft and feeling and present. The one that keeps making music. The one that lets Bubblegum build furniture with her and reads comics in the cave house and sings her mother's lullaby after the hardest night. The show makes this argument not by denying the weight of what Marceline carries, but by insisting, firmly and consistently, that the weight does not have the final word. That the final word is always, always, the choice made in the present moment about how to carry it. Sleep well. Hold what you love carefully. And remember that everything stays. She is standing at the edge of a city that no longer exists. The buildings around her are collapsed and scorched, their steel skeletons bent like arthritic fingers reaching toward a sky that has gone the color of old bruises. She is small. She is alone. She is crying. And she has been crying for 1,000 years. That is where you have to start with Marceline. Not with the bass guitar shaped from a battle axe. Not with the cave full of darkness and floating, or the punk rock fury, or the long midnight hair drifting in the air as she hovers above everyone and everything like she belongs somewhere between the earth and the sky. You have to start with that little girl in the rubble of the old world, because everything Marceline is, everything she becomes, every choice she makes, every wall she builds, every song she writes, every person she lets close and every person she pushes away, all of it comes back to that image. A child alone in the wreckage, clutching a stuffed bear some kind stranger found in the ruins of a toy store, watching the world rebuild itself around her while she stays, fundamentally, in the same place. Adventure Time gave us a lot of things. It gave us a universe built on the ashes of the one we already know. Painted in bright candy colors like the world decided to make itself beautiful because it had no other choice. It gave us philosophical depth, wrapped in 11-minute shorts about magic dogs and candy kingdoms and mathematical wizards. It gave us some of the most genuinely heartbreaking moments in the history of animation, delivered without warning, buried inside episodes that started as jokes about sandwiches and ended with your chest feeling like something heavy and soft had sat on it. But what it gave us in Marceline the Vampire Queen is something rarer than any of that. It gave us a character whose entire arc is a meditation on grief. On what happens to a person when loss is not a single event, but the permanent condition of their existence. On how someone survives not one catastrophic abandonment, but several, across the span of centuries, and how they slowly, painfully, imperfectly, learn that survival is not the same as living, and that living is not the same as healing, and that healing is not the destination so much as the direction. What we are going to explore in this video is the philosophy buried inside Marceline Abadir. The way her story quietly asks enormous questions about identity, about trauma, about the cost of immortality, about what music does when words fail, about the kind of love that outlasts everything, including memory itself, and about what it means to finally, after 1,000 years of being left, choose to stay. This is going to take us through her origin, through the Mushroom War and the world it destroyed, through every parental figure who left a mark on her, through the psychology of her songs, through the Stakes miniseries and what it actually argued about identity, through her relationship with Princess Bubblegum, and through the quiet, devastating resolution of Obsidian. So get comfortable. Let everything slow down. And let me tell you about a girl who survived the end of the world. Hey, if you are watching this right now, I want to know where you are. Drop a comment below and tell me the time and place you are watching from. And if you are enjoying what we do here on Dozing Off Time, please consider subscribing. It genuinely helps, and I appreciate every single one of you. Now, back to Marceline. Section 1. The Girl Who Survived the End of the World. Marceline Abadir is, by the time we meet her in Adventure Time, approximately 1,000 years old. She has existed through more history than any human civilization currently alive. She was there when the Mushroom War remade the world. She was there in the immediate aftermath. In those first impossible years, when what had been human civilization was just ash and strange new creatures and radiation reshaping everything it touched. She walked the ruins of the old world with Simon Petrikov. She survived things that should have killed her multiple times. She became the vampire queen not by birth or inheritance, but by hunting and defeating every vampire that existed, one by one, until she was the last one left. She has built and abandoned more homes than most people can imagine owning. She has had relationships that lasted decades, or centuries, and then ended in ways that left her emptier than she had been before. And when we first meet her, in the episode called Evicted, her first act is to kick Finn and Jake out of their treehouse. This is entirely on purpose. Adventure Time does this kind of thing deliberately. It introduces characters at their most surface level, their most easily dismissed, their most apparently antagonistic, and then it spends seasons slowly peeling back the layers until you can barely remember why you ever thought they were simple. Marceline in that first episode is performing. She is doing the thing she always does, which is be so aggressively herself that no one thinks to look for what is underneath. She floats, she snarls. She plays her bass so loud it rattles the walls. She does not need this particular treehouse. She just wants it, and she takes it, and she dares anyone to tell her she is wrong to. But the show has already left a clue for the people paying attention. When she finally relents and lets Finn and Jake come back, she does it like it was her idea all along. She does not apologize. She does not explain. What she does is tell them, almost offhandedly, that they can have the house back, and then she drifts away into the night like she was never really invested in the first place. Like she does not actually need anything from anyone. Like she never has. The bravado is the armor. The armor is always telling you exactly what it is protecting. To understand why Marceline is built the way she is, you have to understand where she comes from. And where she comes from is genuinely extraordinary, because Marceline's origin story is not just a character backstory. It is a mythology. It is the Adventure Time universe in miniature, containing within it all the show's central themes about loss and time, and the question of whether you can become something new without letting go of everything you were. She is the daughter of two different kinds of eternity. Her father is Hunsan Abadir, the Lord of Evil, the ruler of the Nightosphere, a dimension that functions as a kind of hell for this universe. He is deathless, meaning he literally cannot be killed. He is ancient. He is a demon in the most foundational sense, not a creature that chose darkness, but an entity for whom darkness is simply the natural state, like water is the natural state of the ocean. And her mother is Elise, a human woman who survived the Mushroom War and carried her half-demon daughter through the ruins of civilization, until she could not anymore. Between these two parents, one immortal, one mortal, one from a dimension of pure evil, one from a world that had just destroyed itself, Marceline inherits everything: the immortality and the vulnerability, the power and the tenderness, the demonic soul-touching abilities and the very human capacity for music, for grief, for the particular kind of longing that makes a person write songs at 3 a.m. about things they are not ready to say out loud. She is, in the most literal possible sense, a creature of contradictions. And contradictions, in Adventure Time, are not flaws to be resolved. They are the point. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because one of the things Adventure Time does that most children's media, and honestly, most adult media, refuses to do is insist that complexity is the default condition of a person, not an aberration. The impulse in storytelling is usually to resolve contradictions, to have a character choose one thing and stay chosen, to arc toward coherence. Adventure Time does not care about coherence in that way. It cares about truth. And the truth is that Marceline is simultaneously genuinely terrifying and genuinely tender. She is an entity that can summon the undead and shake the walls of any room she enters. And she is also someone who writes songs about her dad eating her fries and cries in an empty bomb shelter while listening to a dead woman's voicemail. Both of these are fully real. Neither cancels the other out. This is, if you want to be philosophical about it, a form of radical authenticity. Not the Instagram kind, not the performative kind, but the uncomfortable and often lonely kind that comes from being someone whose interior life does not have clean edges and who has decided, or been forced by circumstance to decide, that the clean-edged version of herself is not available and never was. Marceline's surface presentation, especially early in the series, is all sharp edges. She is the vampire queen. She is cool. She floats. She bites. She plays music loud enough to rattle the foundations of whatever building she is in. She does not apologize. She does not explain. She takes what she wants and dares anyone to say something about it. This is the performance, and the performance is genuinely compelling, which is part of why the character became so popular so quickly. She is magnetic in the way that people who seem fully self-contained are magnetic. They appear not to need anything from you, which paradoxically makes you want to give them everything. But the show keeps giving you these cracks in the surface. The way she responds to the Ice King, who everyone else treats as a nuisance. The songs which say things her face never would. The houses she keeps moving into and out of. Not because she needs space, but because the Ice King keeps finding her, keeps showing up, keeps being the ghost of the man she is still grieving without permission to grieve. The way Finn and Jake grow on her, not because she chose friends, but because friendship, for all her defenses against it, keeps happening to her. And eventually, across years of small accumulated evidence, you realize something about Marceline that her armor was designed to prevent you from realizing. She is profoundly, continuously lonely. Not the loneliness of someone who wants company and cannot find it, but the deeper kind. The kind that comes from feeling fundamentally unknown, from having built the self so effectively that even the people who care about you are, in some essential way, engaging with the performance rather than the person. The loneliness of 1,000 years of being almost but not quite fully seen. This is the condition she lives in at the start of Adventure Time. And this is what the whole long arc of her story is about changing. The Mushroom War itself is one of the most quietly devastating details in the entire series precisely because we never see it fully. We get glimpses. An image here, a reference there, a flashback that shows what the skyline used to look like before it turned into ruins. What we understand is that it was nuclear, that it was catastrophic, that it destroyed human civilization in a way so complete that 1,000 years later, the only human left in the land of Oo is a kid named Finn, who was raised by dogs. That the world that emerged from the Mushroom War, the land of Oo, the Candy Kingdoms, the magical creatures, the radiation-born monsters, is essentially built on top of the corpse of the world we recognize. Marceline grew up in that transition. She did not just survive the end of civilization. She watched it happen and then had to figure out how to live in whatever came next. Most people never have to contend with the death of their entire world. Most people's losses are specific and bounded. A person, a relationship, a home, a version of themselves they cannot get back. But Marceline's first and foundational loss was everything. The context in which she had existed simply ceased to be. The civilization that produced her mother, that had roads and buildings and cities and music, and a whole accumulated culture of human things. It was just gone. And she was still there, carrying all of it, with nowhere to put it and no one left who understood what she had lost. This is the philosophical seed from which everything else in her story grows. Because there is something that happens to a person when the scale of their loss exceeds the scale of what any language or framework can accommodate. Grief assumes there is a world still intact enough to do the grieving in. Marceline's grief has been, from the very beginning, bigger than the container, and so she built containers, She built walls and performances and bass guitar solos loud enough to fill the space where all that feeling lives. She built an identity so fierce and thorny and cool that getting too close to her feels like it requires protective gear. She built, in other words, exactly what every person builds when the thing they cannot afford to feel is just sitting there underneath everything they do. She built a way to survive. But survival, as Marceline herself eventually says, is not the same as living. And the entire long arc of her 1,000 years is the slow and painful movement from one toward the other. Section 2. Elise and the lie that wasn't a lie. Let's talk about Marceline's mother, because Elise is one of the most quietly devastating figures in all of Adventure Time, and she only appears in flashbacks, and she only gets a handful of minutes of screen time across the entire run of the show, and that restraint is exactly what makes her so powerful. We first get a glimpse of her in a flashback during the Stakes miniseries, in an episode called Everything Stays. Young Marceline and her mother are living in a trailer in the desert. The world outside is broken. The air is probably still wrong from the bombs. The landscape is dust and ruins and the occasional mutated animal that used to be something recognizable. And inside this small, battered vehicle, Elise is singing a lullaby to her daughter. The lullaby is called Everything Stays, and it is one of the most beautiful and philosophical songs in the entire series. Rebecca Sugar, who wrote most of Marceline's defining musical moments during her time on Adventure Time, wrote this song in a specific register: soft, minor, genuinely comforting in the way that only honest songs can be. The lyrics describe how things change slowly, daily and nightly, in little ways. How everything stays, even as it changes. How what seems gone has just moved slightly, like a stone turning underneath the water. Think about what that song is doing in the context of this moment. Elise is singing it to Marceline because Marceline has said she does not want to take a nap. Her dreams are weird, she says, and Elise tells her that maybe her dreams are just normal things, seen from a different angle. And then she sings this song about how nothing really leaves, how everything remains even when it looks like it has gone. Now hold that image in your mind, and remember what we find out later. Elise is dying. She has been dying for some time by this point, carrying an illness in her body that is almost certainly radiation sickness from the Mushroom War's aftermath. She is not going to make it to whatever destination they are heading toward. She has possibly known this for a while, and she is sitting in a rusted trailer in the middle of the post-apocalypse, singing her little daughter a song about how everything stays. The kindness of that is staggering. The tragedy of it is staggering in a different direction. Because Elise's entire approach to parenting Marceline in those last months is built on a kind of protective deception. And the show asks you to hold two completely true things at once: that the deception comes from profound love, and that it causes profound damage. In Obsidian, the Distant Lands special, we get the full picture of what happened. Marceline and her mother are moving through the ruins of the old world, trying to reach a fallout shelter that Elise has been calling the clubhouse. She tells Marceline there is a party there, people waiting for them, something good at the end of the road. Then Marceline uses her demon powers for the first time, sucking the soul of a mutant animal that attacked them. And Elise witnesses it and is visibly shaken by it. And very shortly afterward, she tells Marceline to go ahead on her own. She will follow when she fixes the motorcycle. She draws Marceline a map. She sends her daughter forward into the future, and then she stays behind and dies. Marceline reaches the clubhouse. It is a bomb shelter. Its former inhabitants are all dead, and her mother never comes. For the better part of 1,000 years, Marceline believes two things simultaneously: that her mother is dead, and that her mother sent her away because of what she saw, because of the demon powers, because Marceline frightened her. Because in the end, when her daughter showed her the most terrifying part of herself, her mother flinched. And this belief, which is entirely understandable given the evidence available to Marceline, becomes one of the foundational stones of her psychology. She is someone who, at the deepest possible level, expects to be left when she is truly seen. She learns, before she has reached double digits in her age, that showing your monstrous parts costs you your most important relationships. That being fully yourself is a risk that may not be worth taking. It is only in Obsidian, in the present-day story, that Marceline finds a recorded message her mother left behind. And in that message, Elise explains everything. She was sick. She was dying. She did not leave because Marceline scared her. She left because she did not want Marceline to watch her die. She thought the shelter was safe, that there would be people there to care for her daughter. She was wrong about that, and she knew when she pressed record on that message that she might be wrong about that. And she said it anyway. I love you. I know you will survive without me. The world will not change who you are, because you have a good heart. Marceline hears this recording and breaks down completely. And the reason it hits so hard is not just because it resolves the mystery. It is because of what it means about the 1,000 years of believing wrong, about all those years she spent carrying the assumption that love had a limit, that the monstrous parts of her would eventually cost her everyone, that she should not show those parts, that she should hold them in, that the armor was justified. And it turns out the very first evidence she had for all of that was wrong. Her mother did not leave because Marceline was a monster. Her mother left because she was a mother. This is one of the most philosophically loaded reversals in the show, because it is not a simple correction of a misunderstanding. It does not erase the 1,000 years. It does not undo the belief system Marceline built on top of a faulty foundation. What it does is something stranger and more honest. It reveals that grief does not require facts to be real. That trauma is not about what actually happened, but about what you had to believe in order to make sense of it. Marceline built a whole interior architecture on the assumption that love was conditional and conditional on the worst possible condition, on her monstrosity. And that architecture shaped her for centuries. And it was built on a mistake. There is a name, in psychology and philosophy, for the kind of narrative we build around early wounds. The meaning-making that happens in the immediate aftermath of a formative loss, when we are young and lack the context or the vocabulary to understand what actually happened. And so we reach for the most available explanation, which is often, when we are children, some version of this happened because of me, because of what I am, because of what I showed you, because the world responded to me in a particular way, which must mean the world knows something about me that I have not yet had the courage to fully admit. Marceline built her entire psychology around that explanation for 30 years of her young life. And then she spent the next 970 years living inside the building she constructed from it, adding rooms, reinforcing the walls, growing elaborate and beautiful things from the soil of the foundational belief that being fully known would cost her everyone. That the monstrous parts of her were the truest parts. That love had limits, and she was the kind of person who reliably found those limits. And the world kept confirming this belief. Not because the belief was true, but because she had arranged her life to make it look true. She moved before people could leave her. She kept the walls up before anyone could decide the view from inside wasn't worth it. She maintained the performance so thoroughly that very few people ever got close enough to have the chance to leave. Which she then experienced as evidence that people keep their distance. Which she then experienced as evidence that she is the kind of person people keep their distance from. This is one of the most common and most devastating patterns available to a traumatized person. The protective architecture that kept you alive during the original threat becomes, over time, the thing preventing you from having the life the threat was protecting. And because it is working, because it is doing its job, keeping the pain at bay, it is very hard to see clearly, very hard to ask, is this still necessary? Is this still serving me? Or have I outgrown the need for this particular kind of shelter? Marceline does not ask this question directly for a very long time. And when she finally does, in the Stakes miniseries, she frames it as wanting to be cured of vampirism rather than wanting to dismantle the protective architecture of her psychology. But the show understands they are the same thing. The vampirism and the psychological armor arrive together and have sustained each other for the same 1,000 years. The song Everything Stays takes on an entirely different weight when you know the full story. Because the message Elise was singing was not just a lullaby, it was her last gift to her daughter. Everything stays. Everything she felt, everything she hoped for Marceline, everything she was as a mother, even after she was gone. She would not be there, but everything she had given Marceline would remain. The love would stay. The music would stay. The knowledge of having been loved, even imperfectly, in a world that had stopped making sense, would stay. The lullaby's lyrics are deceptively simple. They describe natural things changing. A stone turning, a leaf falling, the way light moves through a garden. They describe how things that look like they are leaving are really just moving, finding new positions, staying in a different form. This is the consolation Elise offers, but it is also, in the context of what she is facing, an act of extraordinary philosophical courage. She is a dying woman telling her daughter that death is not the end of what matters. Not in any supernatural sense. There is nothing religious in the song, nothing about an afterlife. Just the quiet claim that what has been given continues to exist in the person it was given to. That love is not destroyed when the lover is. Whether Marceline was able to hold on to that in the long run is the question the entire series tries to answer. Section 3. Simon Petrikov and the Cost of Being Saved. If Elise is the loss that shaped Marceline's deepest assumption about herself, then Simon Petrikov is the loss that taught her what love actually looks like in practice. And the tragedy of Simon is different in kind from the tragedy of Elise, because it is not a matter of misunderstanding. It is a matter of watching someone you love disappear, slowly and completely, while standing close enough to touch them. We meet Simon Petrikov in the present of Adventure Time as the Ice King, which is to say we meet him in the ruins of his former self. He is an old man who uses ice magic to kidnap princesses, who lives in a castle full of penguins he calls Gunter, who is comedically inept at everything he tries to do except create cold weather. He is annoying. He is lonely. He is clearly operating with significant cognitive damage. The show uses him for jokes in the early seasons, and not gently. He is bumbling and embarrassing and difficult to take seriously. And then it reveals that he used to be someone else entirely. Simon Petrikov, before the Mushroom War, was an antiquarian, a scholar, a 47-year-old man with a fiancée named Betty, and an intellectual's fascination with the history of objects. He purchased a magical crown from a dockworker in Scandinavia. He put it on, and it started to take him. The crown gave Simon extraordinary power, control over ice and cold, durability beyond human capacity, the ability to survive things that should kill him. It also gradually, methodically, completely destroyed his mind. Not all at once. Not overnight. Over years, wearing it slowly reshaped him from the inside, until the man who had been Simon Petrikov was replaced by something else that used his face. The episode Simon and Marcy shows us what it looked like from the inside, during those years right after the Mushroom War, when a 47-year-old scholar and a 7-year-old half-demon child were moving through the ruins of human civilization together, trying to survive. Simon, in those flashbacks, is extraordinarily tender. He makes terrible jokes. He performs episodes of old TV shows through broken screens to make Marceline laugh. He pushes her on a wheeled chair through empty streets because she has a fever and he does not want her to have to walk. He worries about vandalism when he breaks into a shop to get her soup, and then does it anyway because she needs the soup. He is everything a parent should be, not because he is her parent, but because he has chosen to be. He also knows, with a clarity that must have been terrifying to live with, that he is losing himself. Each time he uses the crown, more of Simon Petrikov recedes. He sometimes does not remember what he did while he was wearing it. He sometimes does not recognize himself in the choices the crown made. He can feel it, the way a tide feels the ocean pulling it back. At some point, Simon made the decision that Marceline needed someone who could protect her more reliably than a man who was slowly losing his grip on his own identity. He contacted Hunson Abadir, Marceline's biological father, and arranged for him to take over her care. And then he told Marceline he had to leave, or perhaps he simply disappeared. The show is not entirely precise on this point, and that ambiguity is deliberate, because the point is not the specific mechanism. The point is what it felt like. Marceline grew up remembering Simon as the safest person she had ever known, the man who pushed her on chairs and acted out Cheers episodes, and told her she was worth saving when the whole world had decided otherwise. And then, he was gone. And what replaced him was an unstable, confused, sometimes frightening stranger who wore Simon's face but did not remember his name. The episode I Remember You is the single most devastating 30 minutes in the history of this show, and I say that Knowing Adventure Time has several strong contenders for that title. In it, the Ice King comes to Marceline's cave wanting to write a song. He brings pages torn from an old scrapbook, thinking they are just words he can set to music. He has no idea what they are. Marceline recognizes them immediately. Among them is a photograph of herself as a young child, with a message on the back. A letter from Simon Petrikov written to her before the crown fully consumed him. A letter explaining that the magic was making him say and do things he did not mean. That he was going to forget her, eventually. That it was inevitable, but that he needed her to know he saw her. That she mattered. That he was sorry. Marceline has never read this letter before. She reads it for the first time, in this episode, while sitting next to the Ice King who is completely unaware that he wrote it. Think about what it means to receive an apology from someone who can no longer remember having wronged you. Or more precisely, someone who was not fully present during the wronging, and who is not fully present now to receive your forgiveness. This is a philosophical problem that has no clean solution. The Ice King cannot receive Marceline's acceptance of Simon's apology because the Ice King is not Simon. The continuity between them is biological, but not psychological. Simon Petrikov is gone in every meaningful sense, except for the specific ghost of him that the crown did not manage to destroy. The ghost that keeps finding Marceline no matter how many times she moves, that keeps being drawn toward her presence even without knowing why. Some wordless remnant of recognition, buried so deep the crown could not reach it. This is what the show means by memory and identity. It is asking, if a person cannot remember their own history, are they still the same person? And if the answer is no, if Simon Petrikov and the Ice King are genuinely different entities sharing a body, then who is Marceline grieving? She is grieving someone who is simultaneously present and absent, alive and gone. She is grieving a relationship that exists in her memory and his muscle memory and nowhere else. The show itself seems to be suggesting that this might be one of the most painful kinds of loss possible. Not death, where the person is simply gone and you are left with what remains in you, but the continued presence of the body that used to contain someone you loved, now occupied by a stranger who occasionally, accidentally, does or says something that feels exactly like the person you are grieving. The Ice King calls his penguins Gunter, the name he called Marceline when the crown first took him. He wants a princess to love him the way his fiancée Betty loved him, even though he does not remember Betty. He seeks out Marceline again and again, following something he cannot name, because something in him recognizes something in her that the crown could not erase. Eric Cohn of IndieWire called I Remember You the finest episode in the series' history. Several critics described it as a deeply moving examination of dementia through the lens of fantasy. And it is all of those things. But it is also, at its core, a portrait of what it looks like to carry someone inside you. To be the living archive of a person who no longer exists. To know things about them that they themselves cannot access. To love them in a form they will never fully be able to return. Marceline is the last person alive who knows who Simon Petrikov was. She is the last vessel of his specific history, his specific tenderness, the specific texture of what it was like to be loved by him. When he is finally restored, when Betty sacrifices herself at the end of the series to give Simon back his mind, the reunion is not as simple as his return. Because for Marceline, he never entirely left. What she was waiting for was not him to come back. She was waiting for him to know, again, what they had been to each other. The critical scholar Stephen Aoun described, I Remember You as focusing on the relationship between memory and identity, And this is precisely right. What is Marceline without the memory of Simon? What is the Ice King without the memory of Simon's love for her? What does it mean to be continuous with a former self you cannot access? These are not questions that Adventure Time answers, because they are questions that do not have answers. They are questions that can only be sat with. The way Marceline sits with the Ice King and makes music with him even though the music is bittersweet in ways he cannot understand. And the show lets you sit with them too. Lets you feel the weight of a relationship that exists in one person's memory and another person's bones. Lets you understand, without being told, that love is not always about the form it takes. That showing up for the ghost of someone is still showing up. That keeping faith with a person who cannot keep faith with you back is still a form of integrity, maybe the most demanding form available. This is the philosophy that Simon Petrikov teaches Marceline, even without meaning to. That love is not contingent on a person being intact. That the act of returning, of showing up, of not abandoning something just because it has become painful or confusing or difficult to look at directly, this is itself a form of integrity, a form of being, in the deepest sense, loyal to who you are. Marceline learns this from someone who was loyal to her, even as he was losing the ability to be loyal to himself. And it becomes, eventually, one of the things that saves her. Section 4. The Philosophy of Music as the only honest language. Let me tell you what Marceline's songs actually are. They are not entertainment. They are not performance in the conventional sense. Not entirely. They are, in the most precise possible definition of the term, confession. They are the place where everything Marceline cannot say in conversation, everything she has layered under the armor of coolness and detachment, and the practiced casualness of someone who wants you to believe she does not care, they are the place where all of that comes out. Every Marceline song, if you listen carefully, is a direct line to the thing she is most afraid to acknowledge. The Fry song is the first time we see this work in real time, and it is constructed so perfectly that you could teach it in a seminar. On the surface, the song is about French fries. Marceline bought fries, and her father ate them. That is the ostensible grievance. And it is delivered with a kind of theatrical teenage fury that almost sounds like it is meant to be funny. Because it is, on the surface. But then the song turns. She sings about crying, about him not seeing her cry. She asks directly, "Daddy, do you even love me?" And then she says she wishes he would show it, because she would not know it. And she describes watching him eat the fries while she sat there with tears in her eyes, and asking whether, if he had seen them, he would even have cared. This is not a song about fries. This is a song about a child asking the most fundamental question available to a person with an emotionally absent parent. Do you see me? Do I register to you? If I showed you my pain right now, would it change anything about your behavior toward me? The genius of framing it around something as small as fries is that it makes the enormity of the feeling bearable to approach. It gives both Marceline and the listener a kind of ironic distance from the wound. It lets her say the devastating thing under cover of saying the silly thing, which is how a lot of real grief actually works. We often talk about the small specific detail because the large abstract truth of what we lost is too overwhelming to confront directly. We say we miss the way he used to burn toast. We say we miss the smell of her coat. We do not say, I have a hole in me the size of everything. Rebecca Sugar, who wrote this song, described writing it as being about her own relationship with a former roommate. She transferred her emotional reality onto Marceline, and what came out was one of the most precise depictions of what it feels like to be hungry for acknowledgement from someone who consistently fails to provide it. Specifically, someone who could provide it. Someone who is right there. Someone who just keeps not noticing. Then there is I'm Just Your Problem, from the episode What Was Missing. This is Marceline directing her music at Princess Bubblegum, and it is structured differently from the Fry song. It is angrier, more punk in its bones, more aggressive in its guitar work. She is not crying in this one, not at first. She is performing fury. She opens by sarcastically apologizing for not treating Bubblegum like a goddess, for not thinking she is perfect, for not being made of sugar. She is swinging hard. And then she gets to the line that opens the whole thing up. It's like, I'm not even a person, am I? I'm just your problem. That line is not anger. That line is grief wearing anger's clothes. Because what she is actually asking, underneath the punk rock scaffolding, is the same question she asked her father through the medium of stolen French fries. Do I register to you as real? Am I someone who matters, or am I just a difficulty that enters your life periodically and has to be managed? The episode title is What Was Missing, and what was missing is not whatever the Door Lord stole. What was missing was Marceline being willing to say this out loud to Bubblegum's face. The door in the episode only opens when someone sings something true, not something technically correct, not something aesthetically pleasing, but something actually, vulnerably, embarrassingly true. And Marceline almost gets it open with this song. She almost gets it all the way open. But she stops short at the last second, because she is not quite ready. She has told the truth, but not all of it. She has shown the wound, but not the tenderness underneath the wound. The door does not open. That detail is one of Adventure Time's most precise small moments, because what it says is that partial vulnerability that shows you're hurting but stops short of showing what you actually need, is not the same as honesty. It is the dress rehearsal. It is the almost. And the almost is what Marceline has been doing for centuries, getting close enough to genuine connection that she can feel it, and then pulling back just in time to keep herself from being fully seen. There is also Remember You, which I have already discussed in the context of the Ice King, but which deserves specific consideration as a musical composition. What is unique about Remember You is that it is Marceline singing someone else's grief at them. She is performing Simon's pain for Simon, who cannot feel that pain because he no longer knows he should. She is being the archive of his love, the living record of what he felt for her, at a moment when the person who felt it is no longer available to hold it himself. This is music doing something that almost nothing else can do. It is acting as the vessel for a feeling that has lost its owner. Simon wrote these words in a state of dying clarity, reaching back from the disappearing island of himself. Marceline takes those words and puts music around them, makes them into something that can be heard and felt, and in doing so, she keeps Simon alive in the only way still available to her. Not the Simon who is standing in front of her with his drum set and his obliviousness, but the Simon she knew. The one who pushed her on chairs. The one who said, "I love you, Gunter," by accident. And the accident was more honest than anything the Ice King said on purpose. And then there is Everything Stays, Marceline's mother's song, which Marceline sings herself at the end of the Stakes miniseries. After everything. After she has been temporarily cured of vampirism and then reinfected. After she has confronted every demon from her past, literally and figuratively. After she has come to terms with who she is, and what she carries, and what it means to go on. She sings her mother's lullaby. She sings the song that was given to her in a trailer in the desert by a woman who was dying and would not say so. She sings it to herself, and it is no longer just a song about things staying. It is a confirmation. She stayed. Everything she has been through has not changed who she is, not at the core. She has grown, she has healed, she has accepted, but she is still Marceline, still the daughter of Elise, still the child who survived the end of the world, still the person who Simon chose to protect at the cost of his mind. She carries all of them with her, and she is still here. This is what music is for in Adventure Time, not for entertainment, for the things that have no other form, for the feelings too large or too fragile for the structure of ordinary conversation, for love that cannot be expressed directly, and grief that cannot be acknowledged fully, and longing that does not have a clean object. For everything that needs a container that can hold both the beauty and the weight of it at the same time. Marceline does not sing because she is a musician. She is a musician because she has no choice. She is a person who accumulates things that have nowhere to go, and she sends them out through her fingers into the strings of an axe bass, and they travel through sound into the air, and for the duration of the song, they exist outside her, in the world, where other people can touch them. And that, for someone who has spent 1,000 years building walls against being truly known, is an act of extraordinary courage. Section 5. The Immortal Wound. What it costs to live forever. Imagine for a moment that you are 20 years old, or whatever age you feel most essentially yourself, and that you are going to stay that age forever. Not metaphorically, literally. Your body will remain in exactly this configuration. You will not age. You will not experience the physical diminishment that tells a person, slowly and undeniably, that the life they are living is running on a limited timer. You will simply exist at 20, indefinitely, while everything around you continues to change. Sounds appealing, doesn't it? There is a reason immortality is a common fantasy. Now imagine that you are not just physically frozen at 20, you are emotionally frozen there too. Not because immortality prevents emotional growth, but because at 20, you had already survived more loss than most people experience in a lifetime, and you had not yet had enough time, or enough safety, or enough support to begin processing any of it. And so, you carry it forward. Unchanged. Into the 2nd century, the 3rd, the 5th, the 10th. The loss accumulates, but the processing never catches up. The wounds stay fresh because there is no such thing as the gentle biological forgetting that softens human grief over time. This is what immortality actually is, for Marceline. Not a gift, a condition. A kind of arrested development that is the direct inverse of what it looks like from the outside. From the outside, Marceline is eternal, powerful, cool. From the inside, as she herself says at the beginning of the Stakes miniseries, she is still a messed up kid. 1,000 years old and still a messed up kid. That line, which she delivers to Princess Bubblegum before asking her to remove the vampirism, is one of the most philosophically loaded lines in the entire series. Because she is not just describing a feeling, she is describing a structural problem. She is saying that the immortality, while making her powerful, has also made it possible to defer indefinitely the hard and necessary work of becoming someone who has actually dealt with their formative damage. The vampire nature gave her the luxury of postponement. 1,000 years of I will deal with this later, and later and later. The Stakes miniseries is, at its core, a meditation on what happens when later finally arrives. When Marceline asks Bubblegum to cure her of vampirism, she is asking for mortality. She is asking for an ending. She is asking, in the most radical way available to her, to be given back the basic human context that makes growth possible, the knowledge that your time is limited, and therefore the pressure to actually use it. But here is what the show does that is genuinely interesting, and that surprised a lot of viewers when it aired. By the end of Stakes, Marceline is a vampire again. The cure does not hold. The universe, through the mechanism of the freed vampire king's essence, bites her again, and she is back where she started. Except that is not true. She is back in the same body, with the same powers, with the same eternity stretching out in front of her. But she is not back where she started, because she has, over the course of 8 episodes, done the work that the immortality allowed her to avoid. She has confronted, one by one, the specific manifestations of her past trauma. She has faced down enemies from her own history that were quite literally vampires who had absorbed parts of her psyche. She has allowed herself to be helped. She has accepted that giving up is not the same as choosing not to fight, and fighting alone is not the same as having the courage to need other people. And at the very end, when she has been bitten again and is a vampire once more, she says something that reframes the entire miniseries. She is happy to be immortal, because now she can hang out with Princess Bubblegum forever. This is a complete inversion of how she started the story. At the beginning, immortality was the thing that needed to be fixed. At the end, it is the context for something she actually wants. The immortality has not changed. Marceline has changed. And because she has changed, the same condition that was a prison at the beginning of the story is now, in some sense, a gift. This is profoundly Buddhist in its structure, whether intentionally or not. The suffering was never really about the vampirism. The suffering was always about what she was carrying inside it. When the interior changes, the exterior that once seemed intolerable becomes livable. What once seemed like a cage becomes the particular shape of your existence, a shape you can decide to inhabit with intention, rather than resigning yourself to because you have no other choice. The philosophy buried in this is important. The question of how to live with the things you cannot change is perhaps the oldest question in human history. Marceline's answer slowly arrived at over the course of 1,000 years, and most acutely over the course of 8 episodes, is not to fight the unchangeable thing, but to change your relationship to it. To take the condition you inherited through accident or trauma or a vampire king's bite, and decide what it means, what you will do with it, what it enables that nothing else would. She cannot go back and not be a vampire. She cannot go back and not have lost her mother. She cannot go back and not have watched Simon disappear. She cannot go back and choose a biological father who saw her clearly and loved her without agenda. None of these are available to her. But she can decide that the immortality is a container for love rather than a sentence to loneliness. She can decide to carry the memories of her mother and Simon as something other than wounds. She can decide, with full knowledge of what it costs to open that door, to let someone in. The price of immortality, as the Hierophant and the Vampire King both tell her, is not just the inability to walk in the sun. It is watching everyone you love grow old and die while you remain. It is the accumulation of losses on a scale that has no upper limit. It is, in the most literal sense imaginable, the slow construction of a grief that outlasts everything. What Marceline does with that grief over the course of the series is the whole show. And the resolution it arrives at is not the elimination of the grief, but the finding of a reason that makes it worth bearing. A person worth being immortal for. A love that justifies the terrible patience of outliving everyone. We will get to that love. But first, there is a father to contend with. Section 6. Hunson Abadir and the Philosophy of Inadequate Love. Hunson Abadir, Lord of Evil, ruler of the Nightosphere, is many things. He is, by any standard metric, an objectively terrible father. He is also, in the show's complicated and generous reading of family dynamics, someone who loves his daughter in the only way he knows how, which is to say, badly, inconsistently, and in ways that are more about what he needs from her than what she needs from him. When we first meet him in It Came from the Nightosphere, he has been summoned by Finn, who after hearing Marceline's Fry song, felt that clearly these two needed to reconcile. The summoning does not go the way Finn intended. Hunson immediately goes on a soul-sucking rampage across Ooh, stealing everyone's souls with the cheerful abandon of someone who finds this perfectly normal. He also takes Marceline's bass guitar, because he thinks it is a fancy lute, and does not appear to understand that it matters to her. And here is the extraordinary thing. Both his most evil act in this episode and his most revealing one happen simultaneously. He sucks souls with the enthusiasm of a hobby. And when he finally hears Marceline's song, when Finn plays it back to him and Hunson actually listens to his daughter asking, in her terribly indirect way, whether he loves her, he stops. He is moved. He apologizes. He says he does love her. He says he was deeply sorry he ate her fries, that he never meant to hurt her. This is the Hunson Abadir pattern. The show gives him 3 separate episodes, spread across the series, and the structure of every single one is essentially the same. Hunson does something spectacularly inconsiderate. Marceline is hurt. Hunson has a moment of genuine emotional clarity and acknowledges his love for his daughter. Everyone patches things up slightly, and then he leaves again. This has been pointed out by more than one reviewer as somewhat repetitive as a character arc, and that observation is fair. But there is something else going on in the repetition that is worth examining. The pattern itself is the point. Because Hunson Abadir is not a villain pretending to be a father, he is genuinely something more uncomfortable than that. An absent, self-centered parent who actually does love his child, but whose love is expressed at his own convenience rather than her need, and whose consistent failure to prioritize her has done damage far exceeding anything he consciously intended. This is more common in real life than pure villainy is. Most inadequate parents are not malicious. They are self-absorbed or overwhelmed, or operating from their own unprocessed damage, or simply constitutionally ill-suited for the steady, unglamorous work that good parenting requires. Hunson is the demon lord of evil, but strip away the mythology and what you have is a parent who shows up when it is interesting to him, who sees his daughter primarily as an extension of himself, and therefore deserves to inherit his legacy, who can be genuinely moved by her pain when it is brought to his direct attention, but who consistently forgets this lesson between episodes. The fries incident, which seems so absurd on the surface, he ate her fries and she wrote a song about it, is revealed on closer examination to be exactly the kind of small act that accumulates into a comprehensive statement about what a person means to you. Marceline bought those fries. They were hers. She was excited about them. And Hunson ate them and did not even look at her face while he did it. Did not notice that she minded. Did not notice that she cried. The song is not about fries. It is about years of being not quite seen by the one person who is supposed to know you best. It is about the specific loneliness of being invisible to your own parent. And the question at the center of it, do you even love me, is the question that Marceline has needed answered since long before the fries, since the beginning, since whatever decision Hunson made not to be present in her early life, not to protect her from the Mushroom War's aftermath, not to step in when Simon was losing his mind and a 7-year-old girl needed someone reliable to show up. He can answer the question. He does, in that moment. He loves her. That appears to be true. But love without presence, love without attention, love without the daily and undramatic work of being there, this is a kind of love that does not function as love in practice, however real it may feel to the person claiming to feel it. What Marceline takes from her father, philosophically, is a complicated inheritance. On one side, the sheer scale of him, the power and the darkness that she has absorbed into herself and made part of her identity. She is Hunson's daughter, and there is something of him in her ferocity, in her darkness, in the way she can be genuinely frightening when she wants to be. On the other side, the deep pattern, reinforced from birth, that love is intermittent, that the people who are supposed to be constant will leave or forget or prioritize themselves, and that you had better not build your architecture on them, that the safest structure you can occupy is one you constructed for yourself, one you do not share the load-bearing walls with anyone else. This is why Finn's innocuous act of summoning Hunson in the first place is so accidentally wise, even though it immediately goes catastrophically wrong. Finn heard the Fry song and thought, this person needs to have a conversation with her father. And he was not wrong. The conversation needed to happen. The song needed a response. Marceline had spent years processing her grief about Hunson through music precisely because there was no other channel available. And music is intimate in a way that is also, paradoxically, safe. You can say the devastating thing in a song that you cannot say face to face, because the melody gives you somewhere to hide while you say it. Getting the answer she actually needed, however messily delivered, however shortly before Hunson was sent back to the Nightosphere, changes something for Marceline. Not everything. Not immediately. But something. The pattern begins, however slowly, to shift. Section 7. Stakes and the Philosophy of Becoming Who You Already Are. The Stakes miniseries is 8 episodes long, and it aired over 4 consecutive nights in November of 2015, and it is one of the most thematically coherent pieces of television that Cartoon Network has ever produced. To describe it only as a story about Marceline wanting to be cured of vampirism and accidentally releasing ancient vampires is like describing a dream by listing the objects in it. What Stakes actually is, at its philosophical core, is a story about what happens when someone decides they want to grow up. And what it discovers, by the end, is that growing up is not the same as shedding the past. It is not about becoming a new person. It is about making peace with being the person you already are, including all the parts of that person you are most ashamed of. Marceline's opening declaration, that she was a messed up kid when she became a vampire, and 1,000 years later she is still a messed up kid, and she does not want to spend eternity like this, with this emptiness, and she wants to grow up, is beautiful in its honesty, and achingly specific in its problem identification. She knows what is wrong. She is diagnosing herself with perfect accuracy. She has spent a millennium carrying unprocessed childhood trauma and has been able to defer dealing with it because her immortality gave her no deadline, and her vampirism gave her a convenient identity to hide inside. She wants to shed the vampirism because she believes that if the container goes, the contents will change. That if she can become mortal, the mortality itself will force the growth that immortality allowed her to avoid. Princess Bubblegum, who has invented a machine to extract vampire essence and genuinely believes in Marceline's autonomy over her own existence, agrees to help. The procedure works. Marceline is temporarily mortal, still a half-demon, with some powers intact, but aging, vulnerable, capable of dying in all the ordinary human ways. And in the immediate aftermath, 5 ancient vampires that had been contained within her essence are released back into the world. Each of these vampires is, intentionally, a piece of Marceline's psyche. The Fool, who represents reckless beginnings. The Empress, who represents control and manipulation. The Hierophant, who represents tradition and the refusal to change. The Moon, who represents cycles of self-destruction. And the Vampire King, who represents the entire system of being defined by what you prey on. Confronting and defeating these vampires is not a conventional adventure plot, even though it is structured as one. It is a reckoning with aspects of herself. Each fight externalizes a piece of her psychological history, forces her to engage with it directly, and then asks her to consciously choose what she does with it. The process does not make her a different person. What it does is make her someone who has looked at the worst of herself, not flinched, and decided she can carry it with intention rather than being carried by it. The moment of lowest despair comes when the Vampire King's essence has been released as a dark cloud, and Marceline has been pushed to the edge. She says she was just a messed up kid when she became a vampire, and all of this is her fault, and she does not see the point of even trying to fix it. She has hit the wall that any long journey through personal darkness eventually produces. The place where you have been working so hard for so long that you cannot remember why you started, and everything you have done looks like a failure, and it seems actively irrational to keep going.